We've got our triangle here. What overrides all of it is us. We're the ones that can know everything, mess it up. People who work with others know all of this. We know what the challenges of trying to make a decision within a group are, and there's an awful lot of them. We want to delegate decisions, we want to avoid them, but in the mountains we can't. Dale Atkins from Colorado reviewed a lot of different avalanche accidents and showed that human factors are the primary cause of them. And most avalanche accidents occur to males, 25, 30, intermediate to expert skier. Just being an expert skier does not mean that you're an expert at assessing and mitigating avalanche hazard. Formal training, this is something that there's being a lot of debate about at the moment. There are sort of indications that more people involved in avalanche accidents seem to have formal training. That can also be a reflection of the simple fact that more people are getting forward training. But if there is a correlation, it might mean that the training is not doing the job it should be. And a lot of this work is drawn from a Canadian statistician, Ian McCammon. He defined 7 different warning signs. We've talked about some of them: persistent weak layers, warming, terrain traps, that type of thing. He defined 7, and the accidents he looked at, he found that there was generally 3 or more of those present. Now, when we go into the mountains, we're always taking risk. We are in most aspects of life. We get an emotional reward from the skiing, from the boarding, and that's why we go there. So skiing, boarding is about the closest you can get to flying and still remain attached to the ground. So there's an emotional reward, but we've got to manage the risk. If you're going out on a lake like this, there's going to be times when it's safe to go out there and times when it's not. There's open water on either side, an obvious hazard. Are we going to go out in the middle of the day when it's hot? No, when we sink into it, is that time to back out? We go across it one at a time. A lot of different evaluation and management going on here. Our problem is that our emotional side of us tends to destroy the self-control we need to make good, rational decisions. There's a lot of good books out there, and there's getting to be more and more of them. Some of this work's taken from a guy, Daniel Kahneman, and I'll reference the book later. He defined 2 different systems in our brain: a fast automatic one and a slow, more conscious one. So system 1 makes quick decisions. System 2 goes ahead and is very slow to make those decisions. We have system 1 because we don't want to go ahead and make slow calculated decisions all the time. Back in our long distance past, if we suddenly ran into a saber-toothed tiger, system 1 would take over and it'd get us the hell out of there as fast as we could. We didn't want to do a long, slow analysis of the danger. We just had to get out of there. That's system 1. So quick question here for you. Type it on in. Don't think about this too much. Bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Go, type it in. Don't think, don't analyze too much. Oh, we got 10 here in SMC, a 10 from Natalie. 0.1. No, that's cheap. Maybe he means 10. So, yep, 10. Okay. I hate to tell you, but the answer is actually 5 cents. Go ahead and think about it a little bit more now. Now, if it was 10 cents, then the bat would be $1.10, because it cost $1 more, and the answer then would be $1.20. So our system 1 wants to tell us 10 cents, just a quick analysis, but we're wrong. It's actually 5 cents. So that's a little bit of a distinction between system 1, system 2. But when we're in the backcountry, we want to try and disengage system 1 and we want to try and engage system 2 and be analytical about what we're doing. As part of their research, Kahneman and his partner Tversky defined what we call heuristics, which are mental processes used in decision making as just a way to reduce that effort. And they're shortcuts that work well in most cases, but they don't work well in all of them. Our problem is when we go ahead and take the heuristics that we use in day-to-day life and put it into a different context, we run into a heuristic trap, which is a grossly inaccurate perception. So it mightn't be a heuristic trap here, but it's certainly a trap of some form. So when McCammon looked at things, he found that 2/3 of the people knew the hazard, but went into it anyway. There's a concept that came from New Zealand. We've talked about facets of the type of snow. It's been used there to describe different types of heuristics as an acronym. So we've got F, familiarity. Now, I've skied this line before and it's always held. This is where our past actions guide our behavior in familiar settings. Rather than go through that trouble of reassessing, we just did what we did last time. So that's the familiarity one, and that's pretty common. Now, in places like Mammoth, where people often ski the same line time after time, or any repeated activity. Acceptance. No, we don't want to be the person who's going to chicken out, no, who's going to ruin the day. We want to engage in activities that get us noticed by people, that we like or respect, that sort of thing. So acceptance is another heuristic there. In McCammon's study, he found that women tended to have a slightly lower chance of getting caught than in avalanches than men. Women tend to just have better survival instincts than guys. So acceptance, commitment. There's also what we call biases, which are sort of a bigger overriding mental approach than the heuristics. And this is often referred to as the sunk cost bias. We invest in something, and as things go bad, we're reluctant to back out. And we've come this far. Maybe you've driven up here from Southern California. The weather conditions have changed. The avalanche danger has gone up, but this is my last time off work. It's the spring, etc., etc. So there's the power of goals, and it can become an irrational drive to reach that goal. Expert halo, where you would defer to somebody who should know what they're doing. In McCammon's study, he found that leaders with no avalanche training made worse decisions or in groups that didn't have leaders. So a little bit of knowledge is bad. Scarcity or tracks. Probably always heard, there's no friends on a powder day. Powder day is when you need the most friends. That's when things are likely to go bad. People value something in relationship to the proportion of the chance you're going to lose it. And this trap becomes contrary to your own safety. As the hazard rises, it becomes more tempting to get out and ski that powder. But that powder is there because the hazard is rising. Social facilitation. Other people tend to reduce what seems to be the seriousness or the risk. Just because somebody else is doing it, you don't need to do it. So it lulls us into feeling safe, even when the danger is obvious. Now, it's been found that the presence of peers increases risk. That's been found with teams and cars. Yeah.
The funny thing about that is the track scarcity and the social facilitation are really opposites. So you've got to kind of pick and choose there, don't you? I mean, if you want to get first tracks, right? Mm-hmm. There could be a reason no one's skiing it yet. Mm-hmm. By the same token, just because everyone's skiing it doesn't mean it's okay.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they're just different aspects of our own human frailty.
Right.
inability to make a rational decision.
We can't get out of our own ways.
Yep, pretty much. Yes, it is. It's easy, again, familiarity, easy to do what we used to do. But since McCammon did his study, social media has become much more of a issue. It's thumbs up, we can post from the back country. There's a lot more articles, particularly amongst millennials. There's an article I read a while ago where people often, particularly millennials, don't want to pick on them or any of you, but people don't tend to make the distinction between what happens in the real world and the virtual. Things that start in one world can play out in another. And we don't have to look very far to see that in social media, unfortunately. So these are all things we just want to be aware of. And one of the reasons that's put forward for some of these mistakes we made is what's called an empathy gap. When we're in one emotional state, it's hard to imagine another one. This is used particularly in addictions and so on, where the state that somebody gets to through heroin, addictive drug, or whatever, when they're in that state, it's really hard to imagine that they're going to become addicted, but people do. So, why is Snow like a rabbit? We've got a cute, fuzzy little bunny here. Oh, look at those whiskers and those cute ears. God, it's gorgeous. Look at the snow. It's perfect. It's beautiful. I mean, what can really go wrong when you're out there catching snowflakes in your tongue? It's perfect. It's lovely. But maybe what we should think about with the fuzzy bunny is more like this. We experience this empathy gap because our human condition is state dependent. When we're having a good time, it's hard to imagine that time going bad. But we've got to remember that the snow's neutral. It doesn't care. It's going to do what it does. It's either going to slide or it's going to stay put. Doesn't matter how good a time we're having there at all. So rather than thinking about the snow as being neat, cool, wonderful, which it is, we also got to accept that there's a danger within it. Some people have asked if this is a Monty Python bunny. No, it's not, but it's very similar. So, people make dumb mistakes, and do dumb stuff. So, just talking about it here is not going to change what we do, unfortunately. All we can do is keep it in our mind and keep referring back to it and being aware of our human propensity, ability, fallibility, and our ability to make mistakes. For me, I want things where I can, and I'm certainly not infallible. I want things to be more of a holistic approach. In other words, there's no point doing a Navi course and then driving back home at 100 miles an hour, passing on blind curves. Dead's dead. So we want to try and mitigate our risk through as many things as we can. And probably a lot of people are doing it now with COVID, trying to mitigate our exposure and our risk there. So, some of our approach needs to be as holistic as we can. So we'll keep in mind our human factors, knowing that those are the main reason for avalanches. When we look at data, or avalanche accidents, when we look at the data, people by and large knew what the problem was, but they still made the same mistake. All right, if we've got everybody, we started out earlier looking at the different problems. Now what we want to do is go ahead and look at solutions. So we've got lots of different things here to work through and wrap it up for the rest of the day. So solutions, I need a booklet here. Where's my book? Where's my AIARE book go? Here we go. So when folks come up for the field session, we'll be giving everybody the AIARE field book here. And things in this are arranged the same way that we'll go ahead and talk about today. And that we've got a section for prepare, planning, riding, debrief, and teamwork. And we're going to work through all this stuff as we go, but we'll give these out to folks once they show up. We'll talk about that. So preparation. Now, you guys are already doing it. You're here. You're doing the AIARE 1. So as I pointed out earlier, this is part of a progression. This is the framework put out by the American Avalanche Association, where they've got recreational and professional. You guys are over here doing the 1, add in the rescue. You can do the level 2, which is applying it. You can also move on over into the professional track.
You share your screen?
So the professional track over here applies more to people who are going to go ahead and guide, forecast, highway patrol workers, a variety of things like that. So that's the professional side over there. It'll go into professional 2 as well. And that can go into professional search and rescue and future programs that the American Avalanche Association is going to put together. Not sure how many out there own their beacon already. No, there's a lot of different beacons out there now. Used to be that we could have one of every single type, but now there's so many of them. People ask what the best beacon to get is. The best beacon is the one you know how to use. So get it, read the instruction manual, get familiar with it. We tend to use the trackers here for guiding, because there's something that you hand to a 8-year-old, tell them to follow it, and they'll find candy at the end. Works with adults too, but they're pretty straightforward. They're simple for simple situations. Other ones are better in complex situations, but there's a lot of online resources, and I suggest go ahead and look at those online resources. If you don't have a beacon when you come up, go ahead and borrow one of ours and look at what other people have, how they work. The trackers here work well, but they don't have a lot of range. They don't have the ability to mark different beacons. In other words, to flag it so you can go on and look at another one. So there's pluses and minuses to all of them. But one thing here is that a beacon, probe, and a shovel work together. You can't just have one. This is data from Autovox. For somebody buried 1 meter deep, if you've got a beacon, it's going to take about 90 minutes to actually get that person out and breathing. Remember, it doesn't count to find them. You've got to get them out if they're buried and breathing. A probe and a beacon gets you really close to somebody. All 3 get you right on top and getting somebody out. Over here, if you don't have a shovel, you have to dig somebody out with bare hands, and it's not going to work. Used to be a guy locally who said he didn't need a shovel because he had big hands. Big Hand Dave. I never skied with Big Hand Dave, and I didn't want to. So you've got to have all of the equipment together, and you got to know how to use it and practice with it. Now, I'm doing courses enough that I'm fairly practiced. Again, as I said, like CPR, it's something you want to know how to do, but you don't want to use it for real. You want to practice. I'm not sure if it's open up at the mountain at the moment, but they do have the beacon park up there to the left of Main Lodge, where you can go turn on a number of different beacons and practice, probe for them. You don't have to dig them up. It's worth doing. People who are in Southern California, certainly recommend that people go to the beach. You can do it there. It's not quite the same, but if you put the beacon in a good solid box and definitely bury it above the high tide line, it's another place to do it. It's not that hard. Everybody might look at you weirdly, but if you go to Venice Beach or somewhere, you'll fit in with all the other weird people there. So you want to practice with it. Other stuff other than beacon, probe, shovel. Now I'll carry a bivy sack, first aid kit, repair kit. Have stuff that'll fix your own bindings. I'll carry group equipment, but there's so many different bindings out there now that I can't fix every single one. This particularly applies to split boards. If people have the type of board that when you put it together, you have to put a pin through the toe piece to reattach the binding, I've watched people drop those in deep powder snow. At that point, if you're lucky, you find it. If you don't, you might be scooting out on one ski or one half the board. So enough repair stuff to cover yourself as well as the group. Map, compass, altimeter, GPS, or a phone with all of it on there. These days I'll mix it up. I'll have stuff on a phone or a GPS, but I'll also carry paper. Paper can blow away, get wet. A phone can go dead. So particularly in cold temperatures, and that's what we're dealing with. So I want some backup there. Clothing, pack, thermos is a good idea. And all of this stuff is going to max out the Visa card. So you probably want the gold one. And as part of writing stuff into the book, we want to go ahead and track season conditions. And we want to follow weather, track how the snowpack's changing. We're trying to build up a mental picture of the snowpack. We're keeping track of unstable snow. We're keeping track of those layers, those interfaces, and changes that we see within the snowpack. If you're out there enough, it's okay to be able to record things in the booklet. But for a lot of people, they're not going out there on a regular basis. That's where reading back through the Avalanche Center, if you're in Tahoe, there's a different center. Reno, you've got other centers up there for Sierra Avalanche Center, etc. For us, it's the Eastern Sierra Avalanche Center. Go back and read the advisories. See what the trends have been. See where everything's going there. And I'll do that, particularly if I'm going somewhere new. If I'm going out to the Wasatch, Utah, something like that, I want to read up, see what's out there. Mammoth Patrol, again, the Sesame study site, that'll give you the new snowfall for Mammoth Mountain, which can be extrapolated somewhat to other places. However, Mammoth gets more snow than anywhere else, and that's why Mammoth Mountain's there. Another one here that'll work, this is put together by a guy, Mike, who works for us and teaches courses as well. This should be updated in real time there through that URL to give you new snow, wind directions, and temperature. So this is a screenshot from a little while ago, so obviously it's not been updated in real time. So those are all places to get background information. When you go to the Avalanche site, you're going to get a danger rating. And that's the potential for avalanches to cause injury or death to backcountry travelers, which is us. It's not people who are living there, it's not for highways. And this is the North American danger scale. It's going to go from low to extreme. A couple of things to note here. Low does not mean no avalanche is possible. It means they're unlikely, but we can still have small avalanches in isolated or extreme terrain. Most of these ratings don't apply to steep, extreme terrain, narrow couloirs, that type of thing. All bets are off once you're going in there. So it's going to go from low, moderate, considerable, high, extreme. Extreme, generally everything is shut down. If you're living in Mammoth, all you're doing is digging out the cars, cleaning up the driveway, going inside, getting a cup of coffee, the plow will go by and you'll repeat the process. So extreme is pretty much locked down terrain. Most accidents happen when the rating is considerable. This is often what happens, say, the day after a storm where the rating's been high. Things clear up. In our environment, we generally want to leave 24 hours or so to allow things to stabilize and settle down. So it might drop from avalanches being likely to natural ones human, and natural ones possible, human ones likely. This is where most people get in trouble. The day's cleared up, it's beautiful bluebird day, everybody's antsy to get there. So we can still have avalanches, small ones in many areas, large ones in specific areas. So there's a lot of words like, likely, unlikely, possible, and so on. We've got to be fairly careful about just taking the value or the rating at face value, because we can still have pockets that are higher. So we've got to be careful there. I looked this morning, and prior to the snow coming in, I think danger was low at below tree line and moderate at tree line and above. And it would have been something that looked like this here. That's probably changing right now. What's the wind like up in Mammoth? Is it blowing? Anybody looking out the window? No, we're getting wind in and out here in Squirrel Meadows.
It's not very windy in Mammoth at the moment.
Not very windy, okay. You can't tell what's going on up at the ridge lines. No, that's somewhere that Mammoth Mountain would certainly tell us through the patrol site. However, I'd expect that it's probably windy up at higher elevations, just based on what I saw before things clouded in. So the Avalanche Center here will give this sort of a rating. Other places will use an avalanche rose, which is effectively the same thing. Here they're using elevation, but it could be below tree line, at tree line, and above. The advantage of the rose here is that it incorporates direction. So when we look at this above tree line on a northwest to a north to a northeast aspect, the rating is considerable. At tree line, it's moderate on those same aspects. And below tree line, there hasn't been a rating issued. When we go down to the west to east slopes at tree line, the rating is low. So it's another graphical representation to help you make your plan. So you can look at that as part, that's the overall big picture. As part of the rating, there's also going to be identify the avalanche problem. And our job, or the forecaster's job, is to identify the dragons of the day and where they are from those 9 different problems. And that for us is a starting point. So it's 9 different ones, and it describes the nature of the unstable snow, and that's going to help us to avoid the terrain we need to avoid it. So some of these we've talked about already. So let's start with a dry, loose snow avalanche. Throwing it back to you guys, when do we get dry, loose snow avalanches? When do you think? Type it on in for me. Go for it. Fresh snowfall, okay? Yeah. Yep. When it's snowing. Okay, cold. Yes, generally it's going to be cold too. So it's going to form during a storm. We need to be aware of it during the storm or right after it. Okay, so how do we deal with that? Remember a couple of our red flags. You remember the amount of snow and for how long? Think back, it was well before lunchtime. Anybody remembering? "30 centimeters in 12 hours. Yep, 12 hours of snowfall, 2.5 centimeters an hour, inch an hour. Let's see, Natalie typed in faceted snow on top. Yes, that would give a loose, dry avalanche. However, that's sort of a very special case of that type of avalanche, and that doesn't occur very often. It can. More commonly, it's going to be the result of snowfall. Okay, so 1 inch an hour for 12 hours for Morgan. Yep. Okay. What are we getting now in Mammoth? Have we reached those sort of thresholds yet? I can see a few people get a little shake heads or nod them. Yeah, probably not. No, coming from Wendy. Yeah, we probably haven't yet. But if it keeps up overnight, yes, we could. So easy enough to track just by looking at that snowfall report from the mountain. So we track the snow quality, and know the stability of it, which we can hopefully get through the avalanche forecast center. So this is what a dry, loose avalanche is going to look like. It's generally going to start from a point, and this is our weak over strong. So that's our loose, dry, loose there. Wet, loose avalanche. When do you think these form? What's going to make the snow wet? Warming weather. Yep. Windy. Spring. Yep. Exactly. Yep. Okay. No warm temperatures. So no, we need to be aware of it. When the temperatures are warmer, we've got sun hitting the slope. How can we deal with this one? What do you think? Deal with it by skiing in the morning. Yeah, exactly. No, this is what we'll do with corn skiing in the spring. General rule of thumb, we'll be moving 5:30 or so in the morning. We'll be up the slope while it's firm. Then we'll go ahead, be skiing down 11 o'clock, back at the vehicles, having chips, salsa, adult beverages, whatever, around about 12 o'clock. So avoid it. Yeah, we'll avoid it by our timing there, Peter. And this is what a wet, loose one will look like. They often start from a point where we get the surface losing cohesion. It rolls down, it picks up more and more. These tend not to be confined or to be confined by terrain. You can see this one on the right, it stayed within the gully. So that's what a wet, loose one's going to be. They tend to move pretty slowly. Storm slab, something that we haven't talked about too much or at all here. As the name might suggest, it forms during a storm. We know that during a storm, we get changes in wind, we get changes in crystals, we get changes in humidity. So a storm slab is generally going to be the result of that, where we get what's also called a soft slab. It's something that's more cohesive, sitting over something that's less cohesive. Oftentimes during a storm, let's say we've got wind, crystals are getting broken up, they're falling down, they're falling onto the ground. Let's say the wind stops. Our crystals don't get broken up. They float on down. They put a layer of very flat crystals bladed on top or lying on top of each other. The wind picks up again. We get a slightly denser one on top of those very fine crystals. And often with a storm slab, when we look at it, we can see preserved crystals within it that act as a sliding surface. So again, we just need to be aware of it when it's storming. We deal with it by tracking the weather. Storm slabs are not persistent. They tend to go away fairly quickly as those crystals break down and one layer bonds to another one. So we can deal with it by tracking the weather and being aware when we're out there and what we're feeling. Are we feeling something slightly more dense on top of something that isn't? This is a storm slab in the Sherwins in 2019. A little bit hard to see, it wasn't a good copy, this one. But again, it's a very slightly denser layer on top of a less. Wind slab avalanches. Now we've talked about these some, and we'll talk about them more. 80% of recreational skier related accidents involve wind slab avalanches. That's why we spend a lot of time focusing on them. So when do wind slab avalanches form? Type it on in there. During or after wind loading? Yep, pretty much. No, we don't have to have a storm for wind to be available for transport. We can have it days after a storm has ended. We can go ahead, get the snow, 2 days later, the wind picks up and moves it around. So we need to be aware of it during the storm and after the storm, because those are the Oreo cookie where it persists there. And we get our hard layer formed, something disturbs it, and it gets pushed off. Probably you can't see it, but I can. So how do we avoid it? How do we deal with storm slabs or wind slabs, sorry? What do you think? Check weather, direction of the wind. Yep, we're always looking for figuring direction. We can get some basic information from the Avalanche Center report. We can get it from the weather, but we're also looking when we're out there and assessing the wind direction, looking for the signs. Cornices, yep. Those are we pointing downwind? Yep, we can choose a different location. Whereabouts are we going to get most of the wind events happening? What sort of elevation? High or low? High elevations, okay. So when we've got that sort of event, maybe we'll ski down low in the trees where the snow hasn't been wind affected. Now, remember, we don't want to go underneath places where there could be wind slabs either. We want to stay away from them. McGee Mountain here, this would have been 2012, I think. A slab up the top here, and you can see how far this has come down. This is a big avalanche, and this was a good storm cycle. But the wind here blowing behind and across, we've got our fracture line up the top there, and good avalanche. So wet slabs, we haven't talked too much about these, but they're a specific type of slab that forms when we've got warm temperatures. We need to be aware of it when temperatures are warm and sun is hitting the slopes, similar to what we'd have with a wet loose one. And a wet slab is a slab that is moist, probably from warm temperatures, increased solar radiation, sitting on a hard layer underneath. So that's probably going to be a softer, maybe over a hard type layer. We deal with it again by timing our skiing. These are wet slabs here up in Rock Creek in 2018. We went through a big wet slab cycle. These are on east-facing slopes. They tended to get early morning sun. That upper slab would lose cohesion, but it was cohesive enough to break as a slab, not to just form a wet, loose one. And we don't get a lot of these cycles, but that particular year we did, and they extended all the way through June. Persistent slab. The layer, in our icon here, there's our persistent layer. That's formed sometime in the past. This is a trickier one, so we're probably going to rely on the Avalanche Bulletin to tell us about it. To know it's out there, this is when we might dig a pit to look for it. Are we dealing with it in the place we're going, in that environment? And we deal with it by tracking its stability and location over time and be constantly aware of it. As I pointed out earlier, there was the accidents in Rogers Pass, where that weak layer had been there for 6 weeks, but people kind of lost focus on it. Persistent slab here, this is Mount Rawson, south of Bishop. It's avalanching everywhere there. This is about 2017, I think this was. A deep persistent slab was really the same thing as a persistent slab, but deeper. Maybe something like this. This is in Kashmir in India. You're going to have to be fairly confident to go walking around underneath this thing, but that's pretty substantial there. And when we look, we can see kind of a darker, weaker layer at the bottom there. Give me give me a guess as to what you think that layer there could be. Any guesses? F word, yes, the F word. Deep or depth or from Sven. Yes, it could be. It's probably not depth or because it's not at the back of the bottom of the snowpack, but it's facets of some form probably. Wendy's saying old rain, it could be. It could be some sort of moist layer there, but there's a lot of options it could be, but it's definitely a weak layer there. I don't know if I'd be that keen to go underneath it. A glide avalanche. We talked a little bit about this, but this is when the entire snowpack moves on the ground. And we talked about it in terms of our surface roughness. If we've got a talus slope, we probably don't have glide avalanches. If we have a Tuolumne style granite slab dome, we might. We need to be aware of it when the temperatures are warm and can evaluate or recognize that there's unfavorable terrain below. Generally, glide avalanches, we get warning about them. It'll crack as things move down. There's often lubrication, as in the icon here, by water running on the rock slab or whatever and allowing it to glide. Glide avalanches here off Olmsted Point in Tuolumne. You can see where the whole thing's moving down and this place is actually pulled right off. Cornice fall. So when does a cornice form? What do you think there? High winds? Yep. Yep. No, overloaded, it breaks. Yep, high wind. Does it have to be during a storm or can it be after a storm? It can be anytime, yeah, anytime there's snow available for transport. That's all we need. So forms downwind, we should be able to see it. If we can see it, we can avoid it. And we avoid our time on it, or we don't go on it, but we minimize our time below. The Sherwins, the perch on the far end of the Sherwins there, this was taken a couple of years ago by a guy who, there's his up track there. He went up to the top to ski. In between the time he went up and came down, the cornice here broke. You can see where it bounced down and a lot of debris covered the slope that he just crossed. So we're often going to be below cornices, particularly if we're skiing a narrow gully or something like that, but we want to minimize our time and our timing. They're probably more unstable when temperatures are warm, but they can still fall at any time. So those are our 9 different types of avalanche problem, dragon, that we've got to deal with. So we're constantly looking for where they are, for where they live. In terms of size of avalanches, a D1 is a fairly small one. In itself, it's probably not going to hurt or kill us. A D2, by definition, can bury, injure, or kill a backcountry traveler. And a 2-3 will go ahead, bury, destroy a car, damage a truck, maybe destroy a wood frame house, break a few trees, that sort of thing. It's the 2s and the 3s that we're worried about as backcountry users. By the time we get up to, say, a 4, something like this, which can destroy railroad car, truck, forest. This is 1999 in Europe. 19 people died in this avalanche. A lot of people in Europe live in the mountains. If we're buried by a D4, we're probably buried so deep and so much trauma that it doesn't really count, I'm afraid. And D5s are the largest ones known. They can gouge the landscape. This is Mount Roscaran, 1970. Earthquake triggered an avalanche, wiped out 2 villages. It fell into a lake and made the lake overflow, and that killed 19,000 people. So these are the biggest ones. And again, our beacon isn't going to do us any good in this type of situation at all. It's the 2s and the 3s. The avalanche center here will go ahead and also, rather than the D system, they'll go ahead and use this rating in terms of size, from small through historic. And this was today's forecast. They'll also talk about the likelihood of things. And again, we're getting back to some of those fuzzy words. They're possible there. They're possible on that northwest through southeast aspects, all the way up through tree line, and we're dealing with a wind slab. So that's another way to get in your mind what we're dealing with on any particular day. So that's all info that we can get before we head out into the field. So we're trying to go ahead and prepare in order to do the best job of dealing with the conditions once we're out there. So that's our preparation lecture there. And once we are ready to head out, we'll actually plan a little bit more in more detail. And again, we're in the AIARE book here and going through our planning section here. So, who are you going out there with? Who are they? What's the experience? All those sorts of things there. No, I want to go with people that I like, I trust, and I want to have fun. I want to have everybody more or less on the same page. Now, are they going to take care of you? Are you going to be able to take care of them? And that's, for me, is important. This is where we'll start to fill in some of that data that we've gotten, say, from the Avalanche Center. Now, what's our problem for the day? Who are our people? Now, are we all together? Then we'll plan our route. So yeah, here's today's forecast. Yep, it was low, moderate, moderate there. So this is our starting point. However, what we've got to remember is that this forecast is published only for the Mammoth area. If we want to go down to Whitney and ski, this doesn't count. No, again, it's a starting point. If we go to Rock Creek Canyon, even there's enough changes that it isn't going to be exactly the same at all. Go up to Virginia Lakes, it's probably going to be different again. So it's a starting point there. Places like the Wasatch out in Utah. The Wasatch is a very small range. They've got a fairly large center with a number of people who can visit most canyons most days. We don't have that ability here. There's 3 forecasters. So we'll start to fill out our book. In the book, we have this. We can reference, we can find what our problem might be. Might be storm slab. We've got some hints on what to look for, what things to consider when we're out there. We can use the avalanche forecast as a way to eliminate terrain. When it's low, pretty much everything is open here. When we go to moderate, there's areas that are closed, maybe the high elevations where we've got some wind blowing as the wind blew left to right. By the time we get to considerable, there's probably a lot of terrain that's closed off to us. So again, using it to eliminate terrain. Remember, considerable is where most accidents happen. So we've eliminated some terrain in our thought process. Now we can start to think about our ways to get up to the top here, choosing the high ground here, or maybe away from slopes on that one there. We'll give ourselves another option there where we don't have any slopes above or beyond us there. This might be our descent line as we come down. What's our in route, evacuation route? No, our worst case scenario, probably going back up the same way that we went. So in our booklet, we can start to figure out some of the places we're going to go. A lot of this might seem like a laborious process to go through. However, what we're trying to do is write things down, organize our thoughts, and have a system rather than a haphazard process. Now, in terms of terrain, we've got lots of resources out there in terms of maps, digital, and local people. People who are up in Mammoth now probably already have copies of Greenberg and Ranguri's backcountry skiing book. The problem with this is that there isn't a single route in there that you probably can't die on in the wrong conditions. Most of the routes in her descents in here, the focus is on descents, and there we're all a lot of major avalanche terrain. There's routes in this book that, some years you just won't ski. This is 2nd edition, it's now into its 3rd. So it's a resource for ski descents. And it's got a lot of good ones in there. It's got all the big ones. For me, what I like more is to also be able to go out and do touring trips. Black Diamond in its advertising says it's all about the down. For me, it's all about the across in the Sierra Nevada. There's lots of good descents, but there's also a lot of good straight touring of being out in the backcountry. So I've always been focused more on that side of things, and that's often what we guide. So I've been working the last few months putting together some downloadable guides for ski tours through what I've built up at sierraskitours.com. These are the first 3 that we've got up. And I hope to get more of them up as we keep on going through. So this is also another resource for you that I just started now for what I find is lacking in a lot of the other books. There have been other books produced over time. Original one was probably John Monier's Sierra Ski Touring. If you can't find the 3rd edition of this anywhere, you can find the older one. And the 3rd edition, I think it's 3rd, go for ridiculously high amounts of money, up to $100, which I never thought they'd get that high. So this is an attempt to provide people with something else. We often find at the end of an Avalanche course, people go, well, now what do I need to do? That's hopefully the intent here. So no matter where you're getting the info, it's a place to start. You can go ahead, use online, you can bring up maps. Sherwin's here. Where do you think, looking at this photo, the wind has been blowing from? And what tells you? I'd look at something other than the clouds. My eyes always drawn to the wind crest and the cornices. So it's been blowing behind forward. The angle of the Sherwins here, that's the typical direction that the wind is going to come from the west and load these up. Therefore, we're thinking slabs are going to form at the heads here in the terrain that we like the most. But we can take the Sherwins, put it onto our map here. This is through Caltopo. Some people might have used it already, shading for the different angles. The yellow is the lowest, red, and then up into the blues for the steeper zones. And you can have your choice as to how you shade it. That might help you give you an idea where you want to go for the day. We can overlay it with some of the runs from the ski book and figure those out. Gain terrain to go into, terrain to avoid. Now we can overlay it with Google Earth. The main problem with Google Earth is that most of the photos are taken during the summer and they're not so representative of snow cover. So those are all things that we're planning and figuring out. We also want to go ahead and have options. Things will white out on us. They're whiting out now outside there. You were out this morning. Do you know how to get back? If I'm doing a long distance Sierra ski tour, I'm going to go ahead, and if I'm going to be out for a week, I'm going to have everything planned out beforehand. I don't want to be out there in the middle of a storm trying to figure out how the heck to get back to where I started or over the next pass. So plan for whiteout options there, particularly when you're heading up into the alpine environment. So what we're looking for here is good decision-making, good planning, and writing things down. And we'll talk more in a moment about the benefits of writing everything down here. So planning or preparation, planning, all come together, and then we'll move into the last part of the presentations here.